It's almost like the freaky gym teacher that keeps caressing your little girl's buns at the gym class, and you're saying he doesn't understand what he's doing. When
You laugh.
no, I'm just saying this is what we keep doing, rather than taking him and changing, rearranging his head.
Yeah.
Do you know, like he's Asiatic? Oh, well, maybe he didn't really mean it because he ain't European or something. Do you? I mean, it's like
as well, but it goes back to Kemet. And you'll see one that when you go there and you just understand how the civilization was and you think about how it fell, to me, they was double crossed. They was double crossed. Somebody let the cat out the bag, somebody gave the Europeans some kind of information that led to the downfall of Kemet. And to me, it was these damn Moors.
I ain't bullshit. Y'all bullshitting. I'm not bullshitting. I ain't afraid. Y'all talking about y'all banging on the cracker. Y'all ain't banging on shit.
Plain and simple. Because they got out of there with some knowledge and they ran with it. And they was able to do what they did because they had this information that somehow, the rest of the smart, prominent Africans who were kings and had territories and everything else, somehow they all were wiped out. As I talked about the kingdoms in Africa that's gone, that was laid to rubble, and the people in the kingdoms was enslaved or killed. Somehow the Moors dodged all that shit, dodged slavery and everything else, while all the other smart people and so-called Moors was falling. These specific Moors seemed to survive it, get with Islam, and basically aid in the destruction and genocide of African people.
How the African continent gave its culture to the Western world. As mentioned elsewhere, the Egyptian mysteries and the philosophical schools of Greece were closed by the edicts of Theodosius in the 4th century AD and that of Justinian in the 6th century AD, i.e. 529. And as a consequence, intellectual darkness spread over Christian Europe and the Greco-Roman world for 10 centuries, during which time knowledge had disappeared. As stated elsewhere, the Greeks showed no creative powers and were unable to improve upon the knowledge which they had received from the Egyptians. During the Persian, Greek, and Roman invasions, large numbers of Egyptians fled not only to the desert and mountain regions, but also to adjacent lands in Africa, Arabia, and Asia Minor, where they lived and secretly deployed the teachings which belonged to their mystery system. In the 8th century AD, the Moors, i.e. natives of Mauritania in North Africa, invaded Spain and took with them the Egyptian culture which they had preserved, and took with them the Egyptian culture which they had preserved, and took with them the Egyptian culture which they had preserved.
And then they, we come to America in chains. They somehow come in fezzes and everything cool, and they smart and they get along and working with these white folks while we in chains. Are you kidding me?
because sometimes the opposition is so unreasonable, illogically unreasonable, and so unjust, we have a tendency to forgive them by saying, oh, they're crazy or they don't understand. No, you don't understand. You don't get it yet.
We don't have to debate about this. I don't understand. To me, this is just an easy one. What happened? And if you don't look and do the research, you're not going to figure it out. Too many people are just caught up in the knowledge and thinking that these people are smart and they got knowledge and power. No. To me, they ain't no different from the damn boule. They're trying to conform to the white man's law. And I don't care how much the white man is, the white man that, how much shit they kick about black power and everything like that. This is what they're trying to do. Plain and simple. Go into the court, you say this to the judge, you speak this way, and he gonna let you go.
We keep making excuses for people because they're Asiatic and Africans, as if they ain't sellouts, overseers, COINTELPRO operatives, because we don't expect that from them.
The law ain't gonna work for you. who just conforming to their shit. So when you pay attention, you can see it. They got double-crossed all across the board. Plain and simple. You don't see no Arabs running around claiming to be Moors. You don't see them running around throwing that Moor stuff up, talking about being Moors and claiming to be Moors. Everybody know Moor meant black and that the Moors was black. So when you go back and look at all of the conquering that the Moors did, there were Moorish kings, of course. And they did so much conquering, but they was working for the damn Romans. And that's what it was. They was allowing these Moors to go out and enslave white women and sell them into sex trades and all kinds of shit. The Moors was running around doing all the dirty work. But you don't see, again, no Arabs claiming to be Moors. So when you look up the definition and see that Moors are supposed to be Arabs, since when? Since when? They know for a fact that the Moors was black and that they put them in with the Muslims because the Muslims had the numbers and the Moors had the knowledge. And they went out and they conquered for the Romans.
Right. This photograph shows German East African Schutztruppe Askaris captured by British Rhodesian troops during the First World War, December 1916. Once again, I'm telling you, German East Africans. What do you mean for German East Africans? Yeah, East Africans colonized by Germans. British Rhodesian. Cecil Rhodes, Rhodesia, Cecil Rhodes and all that stuff. Yeah. All these Africans that sold out and have the fez on. Africans. Don't forget you say that you're Africans, right? Conscious black people. Don't forget you say you're African. So this is really you right here selling out your own people. Remember you guys that said you came over here on slave ships or whatever? Well, yeah. Here's you guys selling out your own people. But to school you will let you know that you're really Moors. We ain't mad at you. You know what I mean? We're not hating on you. We know what you did, but it's okay.
And then the Romans double-crossed them. When they conquered and took Spain, they put Ferdinand and Isabella on the throne, answering to Rome. As I talked about before, Columbus was a Roman, even though they answered to them, to Ferdinand and Isabella. This was all under Rome. Rome double-crossed them and basically removed them from power and slowly instilled all their people into power. Again, look at North Africa. Why is all those regions so mixed? It's not ran by black people. It's not ran by Africans, true Africans, dark-skinned people. It's ran by the mixture of these Romans coming in, mixing with these Berbers, mixing with these Arabs and Africans. But the person who's at the top is Rome and running the whole thing. So they thought by coming to America and doing some kind of deal or agreement with America that they was going to get some kind of prize, some kind of status when they got double-crossed, wiped out, and they put in place in Morocco and these other places their people. They got rid of the black faces. You go back and look at everything, you hear people talking about the first president being black and he was a Moor and everything like that. All this stuff goes back to the Moors. All this stuff you got to look at and understand that they was double-crossed, and this is what they're talking about. But their motive, plain and simple, their agenda was the slavery of other African people for their own financial gain or their own political gain or their own benefit of them being in some kind of position of power. That's what it was.
Very importantly, they'll take the crew. Piracy, and in fact the states of Algiers and Tunis and Tripoli depended on slavery. The economies of these states depended on capturing slaves and ransoming them or selling them on. Something like 1 million Europeans were sold into slavery on the Barbary Coast in the 17th century.
That's an appalling number. I mean, men, women, children, and sold as what? As domestic servants, as galley slaves? And
all of those things, Lewis. And also, importantly, if they were well connected, they're held for ransom. So they can, yes, they can be sort of taken on as cheap labour, but also they're encouraged to write home to sort of to London or Bristol in England and to say, look, help, mum and dad, brothers, sisters, send money. I'm trapped here, and my owner has set a price on my.
Don't fall for those divide and conquer schemes. That's exactly why they made them wear fezzes, to confuse you, and you people still can't connect to the history today.
And they've been working that power for a long time. They understand that you have groups out there that's willing to sell a people out in exchange for money. So this is one of the things I believe that Malcolm X found out about the Nation of Islam. You hear a lot of people talking about the Nation of Islam basically being run by the Jews. And I believe that has been going on for a while. You go back and look at the meetings and the KKK sitting in, or the neo-Nazis sitting in with the NOI. What the hell is that? What do they have to talk about? What are these people doing sitting here when you see that swastika?
I stood up to white folks down in Georgia. I know you wouldn't believe it, but you're looking at the first and the last black man that ever went to a Ku Klux Klan meeting in Georgia and came out alive. Not only that, Malcolm was at my house when the Klan first came. They came to my house in a 10-car motorcade. And when they pulled down my block, all the blacks on the block got up and ran in the house, ran through the house. I mean, they was getting out of Dodge. So Malcolm and I, we were standing peeping out the window because they had told us they were coming. They wanted to talk to us. So they stopped in front of my door, the lead car did, and all the other cars stopped. Then they looked the house over. A cop pulled up and talked to him. He pulled away, and then they pulled away. But they went around the block and they came back again. So when they came back, a little short Klansman got out of the lead car. I mean, he was really short. He was a little over 4 feet. He came up to the door, rang the bell. I opened it. He looked at me. You Jeremiah? I said, yes, sir. He saw Malcolm standing behind me. He said, you Malcolm? Malcolm, yes, sir. I'm Malcolm. He stood there and said, well, you want to come in? He said, no, I'm not coming in yet. I'm going to tell you niggas something. If I'm not out of here in 15 minutes, we're going to burn this house down. So Malcolm said, you don't have to burn the house down. Just come on in.
What do they have to talk about? There's nothing to talk about. So I believe this is one of the things that Malcolm X found out about, and that's why he got out. That's why he got out. What other reason would he have to get out? Yeah, he went to Africa. He went to Egypt. He seen what was there. He seen what was there. And he understood how Islam was done over there in the Middle East. It was totally different. And that could be part of the reason why he got out. But he also must have found out about who they was really working with, that they felt it was so much of a threat that they killed him. Plain and simple. Because they didn't allow him to give that full speech. When he came out there to talk, who knows what he was going to say? They killed him before he could finish the speech. But maybe he would have came out and said, hey, who these people are and what they doing. It's not a coincidence. Now, don't get me wrong. I listened to so many Farrakhan speeches. Farrakhan speaks well. And he says the right stuff. Trust me. But he's at that age now, and they let him be. But you can't get to that age and not be under their control. Everybody else who was around when Farrakhan was coming up and doing this thing, they're all gone. Plain and simple. Dead and gone. As I said, every real leader that we have ever had, they have killed. If they couldn't buy you, they buried you. And the fact that he's alive, Khalid Muhammad, they're gone.
But I'm a Moor. Islam. I'm a Moor. and got sense enough to know I'm a Moor.
But Farrakhan still alive should tell you something. But you got to go back and look and pay attention to everything to understand what's going on, and that a lot of this stuff is smoke and mirrors and it's controlled. And you have powers that be behind the controls, and you have, these traitors doing everything they can to get into positions of power, and these people who have popped up in these little low budget, small time Moors groups or what have you don't know what the hell they're getting themselves into. And they secretly want to just be down to be down with the big dogs. Plain and simple. But these people are traitors. And there's no way in the world you should look at them and respect them for what they're doing when they have taken up an organization, a group of people that is synonymous with trading on their people. I don't want to be around the fucking people. I don't want to talk to them. Because black people die when these people show up.
You can't just say y'all black. That means you're dead. Legally.
CIA and the cult of intelligence. It will tell you that the CIA hired people from Cuba and other countries and put fezzes on their heads. There it is, the CIA and the cult of intelligence. And just for all the searching more, there is a PDF available online, free. The CIA and the cult of intelligence. Go check that out.
You need to understand what this stuff is about. So, again, they got double-crossed. Whatever they was going to do, whatever they was doing before all this stuff happened. Because you got to remember, Columbus came over. He came with Moors. It was Moors that helped that man out.
Columbus now met an important monk, one who had influence at the Spanish court. The monk listened to Columbus' idea with great interest. Eventually, he arranged for Columbus to meet the King and Queen of Spain. At their first meeting, Queen Isabella was very impressed with Columbus. He spoke well, and his eyes shone with excitement as he explained his plan to reach the Indies. But in spite of this, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella did not want to act too quickly. They were deeply involved in an expensive war with the Moors.
It ain't no coincidence that you have Moors, you have Morocco, you have the whole connection with Spain, you have the connection with Columbus, and you have, Mauritania, which I talked about, which stretches from the northern part of Morocco to Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and that was called Mauritania, supposedly where the name Moor derived from.
There came a time in 1506, after we lost power in Spain. The Africans ruled Spain from 711. We were calling ourselves Moors, M-A-U-E-R-S, then M-O-O-R-S. 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 From 711 until 1485, 774 years, when we built and brought into Europe the university system, building the University of Salamanca, S-A-L-A-M-A-N-C-A in Spain, a copy of the University of Genève from ancient Ghana, which was equally a copy of the University of Sankore in Tombouctou, which the French later called Timbuktu. Now, look, if you want to read it, read Stanley Lane Poole's The Moors in Spain, written in 1887, or Alejandro Macaziza. Read his book in Spanish, The Moors in Spain.
It's no coincidence that you have the Morocco basically acknowledging America first and the whole treaty with Morocco and the Moors. All this stuff is no coincidence. But you got to understand what it goes back to. It goes back to the double cross. It goes back to the fact that they was double crossed by Rome. And then it was again double crossed by Rome in America. They had some kind of agenda in America to where they would allow Columbus and these people to come over to enslave us in America.
The following is a News 7 Black History Special, Black Slaves, Red Masters. Hello everyone, I'm Sam Ford. Earlier this month in our 7 Inside Reports, I took a personal journey to look at a largely unknown chapter of black history when my ancestors and thousands of other blacks were slaves, not of the whites, but of the Indians. Well, a lot of people responded who'd missed some of the segments and who wanted to know more about the subject. So today you'll see it all and more, and get your pencils. At the end we'll have not a test, but an address and phone number where you can get more information. Every summer at Tahlequah, Oklahoma, the Cherokee Indians sponsor their Trail of Tears pageant, the story of how the U.S. government robbed the so-called 5 civilized tribes of their homelands in the South and moved them by force to Oklahoma. They don't tell about the thousands of blacks the tribes brought with them, their slaves.
My mammy and pappy belonged to a part Cherokee named W.P. Thompson when I was born.
The woman reading is my sister, Elaine Ford Staton, but the words are those of our great-grandmother, Phyllis Thompson Pettit, whose Georgia-born parents were brought by the Cherokees over the trail. Johnson Thompson was Phyllis's brother.
Before that, Pappy had been owned by 3 different masters. One was the rich Joe Van, who lived down at Weber's Fall, and another was Chief Lowry of the Cherokees.
My cousin, Maurice Shepard, reading the words of his great-grandfather. The interviews were conducted 52 years ago here at Fort Gibson, Oklahoma, when both my great-grandmother, Phyllis Pettit, and her brother, Johnson Thompson, were in their 80s, part of a federal writers project. Now, both of them are buried in this cemetery. But after I read their words, I was set on a mission to find out how my family became slaves of the Indians. I learned that beginning with the administration of George Washington, it was the policy of the U.S. government to civilize the Indians by teaching them modern farming techniques.
To adopt agricultural practices that patterned after the whites, and one of those in the South was slave trade.
I don't ever talk about it very much because I think it's a very shameful part of Cherokee history, and so I've purposely avoided involving myself in that whole issue.
While the current chief may be ashamed, at the Cherokee Museum today are slave bills of sale, including one for 3 slaves bought in 1841 by then Principal Chief John Ross. The chief and his brother Lewis were among the biggest slaveholders in the tribe. Indeed, many of my mother, Kathleen's ancestors, the Rosses, were owned by the chief's family.
They were Southerners. They adopted Southern institutions, Southern dress, Southern black slavery.
But one characteristic they did not like was Southern greed for their land. By 1830, through wars and treaties, the 5 tribes had lost most of it. Then they were all ordered to move west to Oklahoma. 4 of the tribes left, but the Cherokees took their case to the U.S. Supreme Court and won. At least they won the lawsuit. Then the man on the $20 bill stepped in.
And President Jackson essentially told the Supreme Court, you know, you made your ruling in favor of the Cherokees, now, you know, try to enforce it.
As president, Andrew Jackson controlled the army, so 14,000 Cherokees and 1,600 slaves were herded to Oklahoma, some groups in winter, with about a quarter of the Indians and blacks dying along the way.
You got plenty of Indians right today don't like Andrew Jackson in this area.
84-year-old Luther Scales, who describes himself as 1/4 black and 3/4 Indian, is president of the Coweta, Oklahoma Historical Society. He remembers stories his Creek Indian grandfather told him about the removal, which was devastating for the Creeks as well.
He said the roughest part of it was crossing the Mississippi River in a boat.
How so?
Well, man, the Mississippi River, do you know down there in Arkansas and Mississippi, when you're talking about a mile across, mile or so across the river. And then in a boat, as swift as that water's running, well, you got problems.
Once in Oklahoma, the slaves were put to work, raising cotton, building the new nations. The Merle home, which still stands outside Tahlequah, Oklahoma, was built by the Cherokee's black slaves. And should you think the Indians were much kinder masters than the whites, listen to Granny Phyllis's words in the interview about my great-grandfather.
My husband was George Pettit. He tell me his mammy was sold away from him when he was a little boy. He looked down a long lane after her just as long as he could see her and cried after her. He went down to the big road and sat down by his mammy's barefoot tracks in the sand and sat there until it got dark, and then he come on back to the quarters.
Oklahomans reenacting the Civil War Battle of Honey Springs. When it actually occurred, this was the Creek Nation in Indian Territory, slave territory, in which all of the 5 civilized tribes had signed treaties supporting the South. And the battle actually looked much like something out of the movie Glory, except it wasn't the 54th Massachusetts, but the 1st Kansas Colored Regiment that saved the day. It wasn't the 54th Massachusetts, but the 1st Kansas Colored Regiment that saved the day. Except it wasn't the 54th Massachusetts, but the 1st Kansas Colored Regiment that saved the day. Because of fear of attacks from nearby Kansas, many Indian slave owners fled south.
I can just remember when Master John Harnish took us to Texas. We went in a covered wagon with oxen and camped out all along the way.
My sister, Elaine Ford Staton, reading the words of our great-grandmother, Phyllis Pettit, a girl at the time of the war. In ex-slave interviews conducted by federal workers during the Depression, she told how her brother, Johnson Thompson, and her parents were sold from one Cherokee master to another and taken to Texas.
And Pappy done the driving of the oxen. I was set in a wagon and listened to him pop his whip and holler.
On the square of the old Cherokee capital in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, stands a monument to Cherokee Confederate war dead. But the war here was confusing. While Cherokee Chief John Ross was arrested by the Union Army and shipped to D.C., his mansion was burned to the ground by Cherokee Confederate General Stan Wadey, who just didn't like the chief. And while Creek Chief Samuel Chakotay fought for the South, Apathalea, another Creek chief, fought for the Unions, his slaves at his side. In any event, when the war was over, the tribes who'd all signed Confederate treaties were in trouble.
The United States government informed the 5 civilized tribes that all previous treaties are null and void. And the first thing to be accomplished is to sign a peace treaty.
The new treaties meant the Indians lost more land. And since this wasn't legally considered the United States, Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation had not covered Indian slaves. So the treaty said they had to be freed.
One of the things the federal government required in those treaties was that these tribes adopt the blacks as equal members of the tribe, their former slaves.
One day, old Master stayed after he ate breakfast. And when us Negroes come in to eat, he said, "After today, I ain't your master anymore. You all as free as I am." We just stand and look and don't know what to say about it.
The words of her brother, Johnson Thompson, read by his great-grandson, Maurice Shepard.
Pappy wanted to go back to his mother when the war was over and the slaves were freed. He made a deal with Dave Mounts, a white man who was moving into the Indian country, to drive for him.
Granny Phyllis described a harrowing trip in which they had to fight off wolves with fire from their camp, a wagon journey over land and water that lasted 5 weeks.
When we would come to a river, we would cross ferry boats, but me and brother rode on a bed in the back of the wagon, and when we were crossing a river, Father would make us lie down and wouldn't let us look out. He was afraid we would fall out in the river.
Finally, they arrived back to Fort Gibson in northeastern Oklahoma, where their father's mother was working as a cook for the U.S. soldiers.
My grandma, Phyllis Harnish, was the mother of the Colored Baptist Church on 4 Mile Branch, east of Fort Gibson. She organized the church and was head of it as long as she lived.
Since the Cherokee tribe owned all the land, as new Cherokee citizens, the family merely picked a spot. After Granny Phyllis Pettit married, her first child was my grandmother, Lutetia, whose third child was my dad, Sammy. Pettits and Fords still own this land today. Our Black History Special will continue in just a moment with more about black slaves, red masters.
And then they trying to steal your identity and say they were you. They trying to say, well, no, we was already in America. Try to say that they are the Native Americans and they was here before the colonies. No, y'all led these motherfuckers over here. Y'all led them to America and let them capture your people and enslave them. That's what happened. Don't fall for what they talking about, because you got to put two and two together and think about that. What are you doing even consorting with these people? And then after they enslaved us and wiped a bunch of us out, how was y'all still free in dealing with these people? How was you dealing with them in any kind of capacity to even put together a constitution?
But, our miseducation in fundamentals is so deep and so ingrained that it's amazing that our people haven't woken up and stopped being sensitive as to why a lot of people from other jurisdictions don't like black people.